Could a masked vigilante exist in today's society, fighting crime and injustice? And by trying to achieve superhero status ourselves, what can we learn to become better humans?
How come nobody's ever tried to be a superhero?
There are small groups of guys that are out there doing stuff.
They're taking basically the law into their own hands, right? That's not legal.
Whether or not there's somebody in this real world that can be like Batman and exist, I absolutely believe that it could happen.
What are you? I'm Batman.
This is the Vigilante Superstar Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Vigilante Superstar Podcast, the official episode 1. Technically, I already filmed episode 1, but my wife told me that it didn't explain enough what the podcast was about. So here I am doing the precursor to 1, which makes 1 2. Okay, so I wanted to get on here and give a quick introduction of what the podcast is going to be about, kind of set the stage, if you will, about the Vigilante Superstar Podcast. My name is Matt Bilen. I'm a filmmaker and I'm a teacher. I've taught in the secondary education system of Illinois for 27 years. This is my 27th year. And I'm also an independent filmmaker. I've done one feature, working on a second, which Vigilante Superstar, we'll talk about that in a minute. And also do some freelance motion graphics, cinematography, some videography stuff, corporate once in a while. I like to make short films. And I'm currently teaching high school to a bunch of juniors and seniors who are taking video production dual credit. They get college credit for that. So what brings me to the Vigilante Superstar Podcast? I'm new to podcasting. I've only been on a couple on great occasion, and I've never run one. I do talk for a living, but this is definitely a weird experience, literally staring into my phone, talking at myself. But I'm going to attempt to walk you through kind of what the premise of the podcast is so that maybe you'll tune in for another episode. And like I said, episode 2 is actually already filmed. Did that last week. Thought my intro covered it, but when I played it for my wife, she said, you might want to do like a little intro and just kind of talk about what the podcast is going to be, which a lot of podcasters do, I guess. So what brings me to the Vigilante Superstar Podcast? So the premise of the podcast is really two things. One is to have a fun discussion about whether or not a mass vigilante like Batman could exist. So bringing on various guests, we'll kind of hit on that in a second. The second part, which I kind of realized in going on a journey to make a film of the same title, was that, what can we learn from all these experts about how to become better humans? So it's a bit self-help, self-improvement as well. So I've had an opportunity over the last 3 years to talk to about 26 different experts in various fields. Everyone from professors to martial artists, special operators for the special forces, detectives, criminal defense attorneys, private security contractors, parkour, drivers, motorcycle, superbike racers, pretty much anybody I could get my hands on that I thought fit into this conversation. And let me give you a bit of backstory. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and the 70s, I watched a lot of the 1966 Batman with Adam West and Robin running around yelling, "Holy this, holy that." And I realized later that that was meant to be comedic, satirical, kind of tongue-in-cheek. But at the time, I thought it was pretty cool. And really, through my adolescence, I collected comic books and was really into anything comic books. I was kind of a fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, comic books kind of guy. So then comes the 1989 Batman. And I should probably say, too, that I also watched The Incredible Hulk with Lou Ferrigno, some of those early Spider-Man and Captain America shows, which were just pretty dreadful by today's standards. But then we come to the 1989 Batman, and I remember I was kind of halfway through high school, maybe a freshman or sophomore in high school, and I remember there was incredible hype around that movie that whole summer because Michael Keaton had been cast, and he was a comedic actor who was not a big guy, and people were very upset about this casting, and he ended up doing a great job. But more impressively was just Tim Burton's direction. It was a really unique take on the character, and if you know Tim Burton movies, he does a lot of very whimsical, fantastical, almost circus-like kind of production design and the way he directs and the characters he creates. So 1989 Batman had some of those qualities, the way Gotham City was designed, the production design, some of the costuming, the theatrics of some of the characters. But what for some reason really resonated with me at that time was that Batman was wearing body armor. And there isn't a history of Batman wearing a ton of body armor back in the day. And, it did a good job of explaining the origin story. And then he had these gadgets, and he had a supercomputer in his bat cave, and he had people to help him along the way. And I thought, this is a really cool take on the character. It felt a little more grounded, even though it was still pretty whimsical. And that kind of stuck with me. And over the years, I've thought about, writing a book about this. And since then, there's been articles and there's been little YouTube featurettes and things about this topic. It's a fun, like I said, water cooler discussion. Could it happen? How, in what circumstances could it happen? So a few years ago, I made a mockumentary, entered some film festivals, just kind of for fun. And then post-COVID, I wanted to do a project, and this was still kind of resonating. Like, why not go interview a bunch of experts, film some kind of Batman-esque B-roll, and put together a film? So that's kind of what I'm doing now. I'm in the third year of working on that project. That is getting close to done, and it's called Vigilante Superstar, just like the podcast. And really, the podcast is going to follow the same formula. When I went around and talked to all these people, sometimes I would talk to them for 45 minutes up to almost 2 hours and had these great conversations about just a vast variety of topics. And these people were usually an expert in some way, shape, or form in their field. And usually there was kind of a self-help part to that as well, that conversation. How can we, if we're trying to achieve this superhero status, and I'll use that in very heavy quotes, because I'm certainly not advocating, getting a bat, putting on a ski mask and running around, beating up people in your neighborhood. This is highly illegal. So I should add that disclaimer. But it is a really fun discussion, and everyone that I talked to, I think, enjoyed the discussion. So that is kind of what led me to deciding to do a podcast, because I talked to so many people, and that list has grown and grown and grown. In fact, when I printed out the transcripts to begin editing the film, it was over 700 pages of just transcript. It was bigger than a phone book. It was massive. And that was a 2-year journey just to kind of whittle that down. But a lot of these 2-hour conversations ended up being 2 minutes out of an hour. So I was eventually going to release all of those interviews, on YouTube at some point once the movie comes out. But I also thought it would be a fun podcast to have, because it's got this kind of, again, one kind of, if you're a fanboy, kind of nerd, comic movies, love that kind of discussion. It's a fun conversation just to have, could a Batman type guy exist? And then there's that other side of like, well, if we train this way physically, if we eat this way physically, if we learn new skills this way, can we become better people? Whether it's empathy, compassion, helping your neighbor, and that can take a lot of forms. Obviously, we have a lot of, I know people don't like to be called heroes, but we have a lot of heroes in society. We have people who are firefighters and police and special forces operators and CIA agents that, protect us, that we don't even know, threats we don't even know about. And we have doctors. Think about what it takes to become a doctor. So the film really takes a look at, just the pure amount of time and the skills it would take to get to these different levels of, mastery or close to mastery, whether it's in martial arts or driving, what is legal, what is not legal. So it really hits on everything that I could possibly think of. And that's what the podcast is going to be too. So we're going to talk a little comic history. I'm going to have martial artists on here. I'm going to have special forces operators. We're going to talk about tactics. We're going to talk about, computer hacking. We're going to talk about everything that I can, whoever I can get with to connect with on the show, to talk about, their expertise and what we can learn, again, to become better humans. So that is the premise of the podcast. I hope this was slightly informative for you. I hope to have you tune in for future episodes as I get my footing here in the podcast world, because again, this is very new, and I'm trying to keep it as concise as possible and not ramble. But episode 2 will drop pretty quickly after this one, because again, it's already filmed. And episode 3, I believe, will be Shannon Rush, who is a Navy SEAL veteran, who's also co-producing on the film I'm working on. So that should be the first 3 episodes. I thank you for listening if you've made it this far, and hopefully you'll tune in for the next episode. See you later.